friend say a few $1 million for a business venture, like a brand new gas station. Sounds kind of cool. And then, bam, they can't pay you back. Talk about a tough spot. Well, that's what we're diving into today. A real-life property drama that ended up in an Ontario courtroom. We're talking Rathcliffe Properties, Inc. versus 218-4698 Ontario, Inc. A case that shows us what happens when, well, friendship and debt collection collide.
Yeah, and it gets pretty deep into some legal weeds, too. Shows how the system tries to deal with these kind of high-stakes disagreements.
Okay, so let's set the scene here. We've got Rathcliffe Properties loaning out a cool $2.9 million to 218-4698 Ontario, Inc. And what's the collateral? An auto body shop. But get this auto body shop, it had big dreams of becoming a shiny new Esso gas station. But then, plot twist, right? The borrower, they hit a snag, can't repay the loan. So what happens next? Well, that's where things get interesting.
This is where receiverships come in. It might sound a bit, technical, but it's a pretty big deal in these situations when someone can't pay back a loan of a, financial boxing match. They climb into the ring, take control of the asset for a bit, in this case, that auto body shop. And they've got their work cut out for them. They got to figure out what that property is really worth, put it up for sale, try to recover as much of that debt as possible, basically bring some order to the chaos and try to make sure everyone gets a fair shake.
So receiver comes in, ready to list this property, make things right.
Yeah.
Sounds simple enough on the surface, right? But, there's always a catch.
Well, here's where the debtor, that's 218-4698 Ontario, Inc., they decide to shake things up a bit.
Oh.
Yeah, just as the receiver's getting ready to put that property on the market, they file a motion with the court.
To stop the sale.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Yeah.
So what's their reasoning here? Why try to block the sale at the 11th hour?
Basically, they're saying, hold on, this receiver, they're not playing by the rules. They point to a specific part of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, Section 247, which says receivers got to act in good faith and in a commercially reasonable manner.
Okay, so those phrases, good faith, commercially reasonable, they sound, kind of vague. What do they actually mean when we're talking about a case like this?
It all comes down to fairness and transparency, really. The debtor's claiming the receiver is trying to rush the sale, undervalue the property, maybe even give the lender an advantage and leave the debtor high and dry.
And do they have anything to back that up? What evidence are they presenting to support this?
Well, their big argument hinges on the appraisal. Remember that $2.9 million loan? Well, the debtor, they get their own appraisal done, and guess what? They say the property's worth a whopping $10 million.
Whoa, that's a huge difference. Talk about a difference of opinion. So we've got dueling appraisals, accusations of shady dealings. What's the receiver's side of the story? How do they respond to all of this?
They're basically saying, hey, we're just doing our job by the book. They followed the procedures, hired qualified people, and arrived at a listing price they genuinely believe reflects the actual market value. They even argue that showing their appraisal too early could have scared off potential buyers and messed up their chances of a fair sale.
Makes sense, trying to keep things level. But wait, there's more to the debtor's complaints, right? It wasn't just about the appraisal.
You're right, there's another layer to this. They also had a problem with the receiver talking to the lender, Rathcliffe Properties, while they were choosing a realtor and setting the listing price. They felt like that gave the lender an upper hand, compromised the receiver's whole supposed neutrality.
So it sounds like they're saying the receiver was playing favorites, getting a little too cozy with the lender, potentially tipping the scales in their favor. That's a serious accusation. What did the receivers say to that?
They defended themselves by saying that talking to the lender, especially one who knows a lot about gas stations, isn't just common practice, it actually benefits everyone in the end. They said it's all about using expertise to make sure the property is marketed well, attracts the right buyers, and ultimately fetches the best possible price.
Okay, so we've got conflicting views on what's fair, what's transparent, and what it means to act in good faith. This sounds like a real head-scratcher for the judge. So it sounds like we've got a real legal battle on our hands, with both sides digging in their heels, each convinced they're in the right. What did the judge have to say about all of this? Who came out on top?
Well, judges, they don't just pick a side randomly, right? They look at the evidence, the arguments, and the rules, and make a decision based on all of that. And in this case, the judge ended up siding with the receiver, dismissing the debtor's motion to stop the sale.
So the receiver gets the green light to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the reasoning behind that? What made the judge rule that way?
A big factor was that the debtor didn't really present strong enough evidence to back up their claims. Yeah, their appraisal was way higher, but they couldn't concretely prove that the receiver's valuation was done improperly or that it was way off base. And, courts, they need more than just a difference of opinion. They need to see clear proof of wrongdoing to step in.
So even though that second appraisal was significant, it wasn't enough to completely halt the sale. And what about the debtor's argument about the receiver communicating with the lender? Did the judge find that convincing?
Not really. The judge didn't buy the argument that talking to the lender meant the receiver wasn't being neutral or fair. In fact, they thought that getting input from someone with experience in gas station properties, like the lender in this situation, could actually be seen as a responsible thing to do, maybe even leading to a better outcome for everybody.
That's interesting. It goes to show that context is everything in these legal cases. But the story doesn't end there, does it? The judge didn't just dismiss the motion. There were some financial consequences for the debtor, right?
Absolutely. The judge ordered the debtor to pay something called substantial indemnity costs to both the receiver and the lender, specifically $10,000 to the receiver and $7,500 to the lender.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. Substantial indemnity costs. What exactly are those, and what message was the judge sending by ordering the debtor to pay them?
It's essentially a way for the court to discourage people from bringing lawsuits without a good reason. By making the loser pay a chunk of the legal fees, it's like a warning. Think long and hard before you sue, and be sure you've got a really strong case.
It's a stark reminder that taking legal action can be risky, especially if you're on shaky ground.
Exactly. This case really drives home the point that getting expert legal advice early on in these kinds of situations is crucial. Understanding what you can and can't do legally, weighing your options carefully, and having a solid strategy can save you a lot of trouble and potentially a lot of money in the long run.
Really insightful stuff. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember from this case?
I think the biggest lesson here is to be informed, especially when you're dealing with complicated legal and financial matters. Don't just go with your gut or make assumptions. Talk to the experts, do your homework, and know what you're getting into.
Wise words to live by. Sometimes the most important thing you can learn is not just how to play the game, but also how to avoid the traps that can trip you up. Thanks for joining us for this fascinating look at a real-life property drama. And remember, keep exploring, keep learning.